Hey, welcome back. Philosophy 328. This would be week 5 now. So, it's a quirk of the schedule, but this is like the last week of the first half. The second half is obviously a little bit longer, but it means the midterm is next week. It's when we kind of need to have a midterm kind of test of some kind, and we will. And I'll tell you much more about that, but not right here in this video. But that's basically next week, week 6, and then after that, there's a bunch more weeks before we get to the end. But so this week we have then it's veracity or truth-telling and informed consent. These two concepts go very closely together. You can probably see that fairly easily. There's a bunch of different things there on the reading list. Most of them aren't very long, and none of them are particularly complex. I mean, these ideas are some that we tend to be already a bit familiar with, unlike some other things like cloning, for example, stuff that comes up a little bit later. So anyway, I don't think it's particularly heavy. It looks like a bunch of things, but I don't think you'll have too much trouble with it. So on the side of veracity or truth-telling, and by the way, I just tend to use the word veracity. It just seems to me a little bit more kind of general. When we talk about truth-telling, usually we all know, well, that could mean a partial truth or maybe something added to the truth as well or whatever, whereas veracity, so the connotation is meant to be really kind of conveying something accurately and sincerely. So that's why I tend to use that word. But anyway, in the Vaughn chapter, it's pretty short, and as usual, it's just a fairly accessible description of the lay of the land, the main kind of issues. Talk some about confidentiality, I think, as well. I'm not going to talk too much about that here, but he's just giving some of the issues, basically describing some of the ways that actually telling the truth or being veracious on the part of a medical professional could and does sometimes become an issue. Someone might think it could be harmful to tell the truth, or they might think it's just not possible somehow to actually convey the truth, and so on. All of these things generally get taken up in one way or another by the other readings, and in some greater detail usually. So it's just kind of an overview with some of the terms and the main things just to prepare for some of the other texts. So the first of those from Thomasma, I guess is the name. It's kind of neat in a way. It's just meant to be quite concrete, I should say, sort of, from a practical or clinical perspective of just some of the kinds of situations, the different kinds of cases that arise that raise trouble for veracity, where it's not as straightforward as we might wish. Definitely the emphasis here is on, context really matters, right? That we don't have just some sort of absolute or even anything like an absolute rule to tell the truth that is always taken up or inflected by the situation in different contexts, and those contexts can vary considerably. Basically, though, the view there is that, of course, truth is good, but it's not the only good, and in a medical context, it's typically not the most important good, actually. So there, in general, there may be times where straightforward truth-telling is the way to go, but those seemingly tend to be a bit exceptional. And in general, truth is managed. Basically, it's sort of managed under the auspices of the principle of beneficence as the doctors or whoever basically see fit. So it's kind of expressed there. It's actually a nice place near the end. I think he puts it very nicely, or uses these phrases about, quality of life trumping the need to know. That sort of sums up that view. And then just what that would mean in different contexts could vary, but that's basically what he's saying there. The Lipkin piece, very short. Is often kind of referred to. It has had some staying power just because of the way it puts things. But he takes a slightly harder line, I guess, in favor of, a kind of paternalistic attitude here, basically. Really emphasizing, how harmful, but also especially how difficult it can be for a doctor or a nurse or whoever to actually convey the whole truth, basically. So what we actually see here is, as I say, a certain understanding of what full disclosure would mean, and then recognizing that, well, in practice, that can actually be hard. If you're thinking about what needs to be disclosed in terms of sort of the all of the relevant medical and scientific facts and so on. That would certainly overwhelm most patients, and even most doctors probably aren't even prepared to or able to do that. And so there definitely is here a stronger, definitely a much stronger emphasis put on sort of on a view of deception basically as a tool, right? As a kind of medical tool, you might say. Again, of course, it's understood under the auspices of beneficence, but still, basically, the intrinsic value of truth is definitely low here. Finally, on this side of things, the Cullen and Klein piece, well, this definitely reverses the emphasis entirely, right? Whereas with those others, we get the impression basically that, times where you might just kind of straightforwardly kind of tell the truth tend to be more exceptional, and that in general we kind of manage it with some degree of deception or other. That's just kind of reversed here, and think, no, the default norm should be just kind of a full disclosure, truthful, veracious disclosure to the patient. Allowing still, though, that in some cases, right now the exceptions are those where possibly some kind of deception might be allowable, under certain conditions and within certain limits, of course. But the main emphasis is expressing that veracity should be the default. So this is very close, of course, to the principle of autonomy. It's really emphasizing that over beneficence and thinking that there are good reasons for that, that in general, the reasons people might think that beneficence pushes in the direction of a managed deception, most of those aren't true. In any ways, the underlying moral reason is quite strong that people ought to be able to make their own decisions. You can think about this in connection, if you look ahead, you read the Canterbury v. Spence case, basically, because there the idea of, thinking about what full disclosure could mean isn't the way that someone like Lipkin might have been thinking. It's not disclosure of all of the scientific and medical facts as such, but just the relevance and the salience, what it really means for the patient, that really ought to be conveyed. And that's really what Cullen and Klein are emphasizing here. So that's one way of understanding how that difference comes about. I'm going to actually end this video and then make another one with the stuff on informed consent, just to save you having to, sit through a video that's more than 10 minutes long or something. Sorry, I'm going to cut this one off and make another one.